I've always been an introvert. I like staying inside and playing video games or animating or getting drunk and watching movies with my roommates. I've never been one for large public gatherings. The first one I can remember would have to be my middle school's formal dance. My middle school had 2 dances every year, and the formal was our prom equivalent. I remember being excited to go and goof around in the school's gym with my friends, but something interesting happened a few days before. There was this girl I was mutual friends with, and one day after class, she asked me if I wanted to go to the formal with her. There was a lot going on in my head in the split second before I answered her. First and foremost, I may have been almost in high school, but I was still at the age where I considered girls to be the other. In a lot of ways, I still do today. I didn't like this girl in that way, but she was my friend and I didn't want to be mean. On top of all of that, there was the social element. She asked me in front of a group of people, so now my answer can have one of two effects. One, I say yes, avoiding hurting this young lady's feelings in front of her classmates while sacrificing my own interests and going stag. Or two, I say no and embarrass her in front of a bunch of middle school boys who would love nothing more than to have more ammunition to tease her with. I figured the best option would be to say yes. No one had ever asked me out like that before, so even though I wasn't interested in her like that, I was a little curious as to how the whole going out thing even worked. I figured I could go to the dance with her and that would be the end of it. Fast forward to the night of formal, and me and my friends all pull up looking fresh as hell, and I briefly meet with my date before heading inside. It didn't really occur to me what was expected when someone agrees to go to a dance with someone. I wasn't thinking that I was obligated, at least a little bit, to spend time with her. The thing I remember most was goofing around with my friends, messing with the decorations. They had these fiber optic lights where you could pull out the wires and it would just be a high-powered colored flashlight. I remember shining them in each other's eyes and doing stupid rave dances with them. I spent a majority of my time at the dance avoiding my date. I felt really awkward about the whole thing. At one point, she asked me to dance and I agreed. I danced with her for about 10 seconds and went back to my friends. Looking back, I felt really bad for how I treated that girl. Another thing I remember about disliking the whole experience was how everyone treated each other. It was weird. Me and my friends were on the lower rungs of the social ladder, and normally that didn't bother us. We were weird kids, we liked being different. Just because we were at this dance somehow, all social barriers had melted away. There were people who used to make fun of me, coming up to me and talking to me like we were best friends. I remember feeling really put off by that. It felt wrong. I would have preferred the consistency that I was used to than having one night where I was allowed to feel normal and well-liked. In high school, I was never invited to parties. That shouldn't come as a shock to anyone. I don't regret that either. I could guarantee that it would have felt the same way I did in middle school. I was a theater kid and I was in band. I spent most of my free time either playing video games or making dumb videos with my friends. There wasn't much social overlap with the people who would go to the ragers or the general popular crowd. I didn't feel any ill will towards any of these people either. Bullying seemed to be a thing of the past, so now all the mental anguish from not fitting in, it came from my end. It was never pointed out to me like it used to be. My college experience with parties, if you could call them that, consisted of a maximum of 8 people, all of whom I was very familiar with, getting together in someone's dorm or apartment to drink and play video games. There was rarely anyone there of the opposite sex. There were only a handful of pre-COVID functions that I attended that did have girls, and I actually remember them fondly. The best one had this guy Dan, who didn't go to Pratt at all. He was a senior year SVA animation student, and he kept mentioning how this was his first party. We were all freshmen. The same girl I mentioned in a previous video about not being aware when a girl is interested in me, she was there, and as usual we were sitting together. She was playing with my hair. She kept mentioning how soft it was, and I remember Dan saying, "My hair's soft too," while letting it down from a ponytail and motioning for the people near him to stroke it. Nobody took him up on the offer. This party went on until the early morning, and we were on the first floor of the dorm building with the window open. We started to hear birds when Dan asked everyone to be quiet and said, "I think I can identify what bird that is based on its call." A couple seconds passed until the young lady next to me said, "No matter what you say, no one will be impressed," which was a little mean, but it was true. After a few seconds, he said, "I think it's a finch." Having a guy like Dan there to buffer any negative attention I might draw to myself for saying something or doing something stupid, it did wonders for my self-confidence. That might have been the most I ever drank in one night, because me and the young lady ended up getting breakfast after the party ended. I had a coffee and this huge muffin, and when I went to bed, I woke up an hour later, mid-vomit. It was pretty scary. I probably could have died. Ever since then, I've been more careful with my drinking and a lot less likely to go out to parties. My post-COVID college life sees little interaction with my classmates outside of the ones I live with. For whatever reason, I've never really hung out with any of those guys outside of class. The only parties I'm ever invited to is to a friend of my roommates who hosts proper 50 people functions, and every time I've attended, something bad has happened. The first time I was chatting up this girl, very much attracted to her, but I didn't think she felt the same way. I found out months later that she thought I was cute, but at this point, she was now in a relationship. Also, she lived hours away from the city. On top of that, the party was held around the time renowned comic book artist Tim Sale passed away. Not a good first impression, to say the least. The next one I remember was a Halloween party. There was another girl I was talking to who I ended up actually asking out over Instagram a few days later. It turns out she mentioned in our conversation that she had a boyfriend, and I either misremembered that fact or I didn't hear her. I remember feeling pretty beat up about that after the fact. It usually takes a lot of courage on my end to do something like that, even if I'm certain the other person is going to say yes. I was incredibly embarrassed. The most recent one was just the other night. It was the night I published the GameStop Girl video, so I was feeling pretty good. I wasn't planning on going at first, but I figured that I could treat it as research for another cartoon. A couple of things happened. For one, it was the first time I saw Dorm Room Girl in over 6 months. There's a bit of a long story there, but we actually ended up going out a few times, even before COVID. There were a number of reasons why I felt weird about it, and I always found a way to somehow mess it up, so we never really lasted past a couple of dates. The last time I asked her out, I was on break from school and working, and she might have just graduated. We were on the train headed over to an Italian place in Manhattan when all of a sudden I started feeling deathly ill. I didn't drink the night before, I didn't eat anything unusual, but I could feel myself about to throw up on the train. I was so embarrassed, but I told her I had to cancel, and we shared an Uber back to our neighborhood. I didn't make any attempt to contact her after the fact. I just figured that there's no coming back from something like that. And she never reached out either, so that only confirmed my suspicion. Fast forward a few months and now she's standing in my living room. It was just as awkward as you'd expect. We all shared an Uber over to the party, and when I got there, I just orbited my friends. Despite the initial awkwardness, it really wasn't all that bad. There was this guy there who was a professional voice actor who mostly did work for Nerf commercials. We actually met at the Halloween party. I remember him mentioning that he auditioned for the role of Ben 10 when he was a kid, and I still think that's so fucking cool. There was another guy that I met out on the balcony that was sitting by himself. I was going out there hoping to be alone for a bit, but we ended up talking and he ended up being a nice guy. There was something in our conversation, though, that made me realize why I dislike these adult parties. I can't really be myself, and it seems like nobody else can either. I could tell this guy was a little shy, but making an effort to continue the conversation. But what we were actually talking about was just the most useless, boring, fake shit you could muster. He talked about wanting to get into voice work, and I talked about being in film school, but how we were talking, it just felt so disingenuous to me. He was making these grandiose comments on the power of a good voice actor, and I was putting up this persona of someone who knows what he's doing professionally, when in reality I don't even want to pursue a film career after graduation. It felt very transactional, like how I might have talked to somebody who's got a job on a film set a few years ago. I really want this person to like me, and I want them to know I want to work on a film set without outright saying it. I want to give them my contact information, but not my phone number because that's too personal, so I'll give them an Instagram I don't use instead. I thought parties were supposed to be fun, but they seem to be just vain attempts at being able to quit your barista job and letting everyone there know just how hireable and capable you are. Most of the time, the conversation opens with, "What do you do?" It's a trick question. It causes you to validate your professional life in a matter of seconds. What do I do? Who cares? Wario Land 3 is on the Switch. Why aren't we talking about that? Another part of me realizes that being so cynical about social gatherings effectively halts any chance of meeting genuinely cool people, like the Ben 10 guy. But sometimes I feel like those moments aren't worth the stress. I'd rather just stay home and get drunk with people I already know I like.